If you're like me, when you travel, one of the things you want to do when you come back is try and duplicate some of the food you had when you were away. I was fortunate to go to Nicaragua, and one of the things that we had every day while there was some form of beans and rice. And very often it was Gallop Pinto, which is a national dish. So on my philosophy of trying to recreate, that's what I'm going to try and do for you today. First of all, you need to have preferably the right beans. Red beans and rice, they're everywhere in so many cultures. But the particular one that I was at used a small red bean. So the pinto bean is real common in Oklahoma. You could use it, but as you go down the line, you'll see differences in color. These are light red kidney beans, very common in red beans and rice, perhaps. But again, they're bigger. They're going to cook a little bit different. They're going to have a little bit different texture. Black beans is another example, and these are used in some of the other cultures in place of the small red beans. Cuba, for instance, is more apt to use a black bean. Guatemala is more apt to use a black bean. This is the small red bean that we can get in Oklahoma in supermarkets. You can special order the actual small bean from that part of the Central America. Probably not worth it unless you're truly dedicated to getting exactly what you wanted to have. Now it also uses rice, and the rice I didn't notice much difference with. They used a long grain rice. It looked very similar. I brought some home, compared it. Very similar to what we usually use for long grain rice. So the idea of this dish is that it's a leftover dish. So down there, they always have day one and day two going at the same time. Day one is where you cook the beans and you cook the rice. You eat some of those, you have the leftovers, and the next day you have gallo pinto. So to cook the beans, you're going to put a cup of beans that you've sorted through to make sure you don't have any stones or broken beans. 3 or 4 cloves of garlic. These were massive, so I only used 3 when I did it. And about 8 cups of water. You've got some options as to how you're going to cook it. You can either bring it up to a boil, let it boil for 2 minutes, turn it off and let it sit for an hour. With smaller beans, black beans for instance, they don't even need to be soaked. You could also go through the effort of soaking them overnight by covering them with water, which is the method I did. It actually gives the best quality bean. It takes more time. So the beans are done, and you can see this is some of the retained cooking water. I saved about 1.5 cups of cooking water and a little bit extra in case I lost some of it for some reason, but I also wanted to have a little bit more in case the gallo pinto looked a little dry. I've got a medium saucepan here. We're going to do the rice now, which is also the day one of this effort. So to the saucepan, I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of oil. And I'm using coconut oil because that's what would have been commonly used down there. And I've got about 2/3 of a cup of onions. Let's see if I can turn this down a little bit more. I don't want it to get too dark. You'd saute this until the onion became translucent on a medium to medium-low heat. And while that's happening, you can go ahead and get some of the other things ready. What I wanted to do while that was happening, however, was look a little bit about the coconut oil versus olive oil. Now, these are 2 very common oils here. You can see this one is highly saturated. It's well into the 90s here today in the garden, and it's still solid. It's got a very, very different melting point than what you can see here with the olive oil. If I put them in the refrigerator, this one's also going to turn solid, but because it's got such a high level of monounsaturates, it's going to come back to liquid fairly quickly at a room temperature. It doesn't even have to get this warm. This one's starting to melt and eventually would melt if the temperature is hot enough. Oddly, I never saw it solid while I was there. It was always plenty warm for it to be liquid, and I thought I was going to have to put it in the refrigerator for that to happen, but when I pulled it out of my suitcase when I got back to the States, it was already in the solid form. So we'll assume that we now have had some time for the rice or the onions to become translucent. And I'm going to add 1.5 cups of long grain white rice. And again, we're going to let this cook together for a little bit. The goal here is to stir them together until all of the rice is coated with oil and it gets a little bit of cooking done on the outside. And the thought behind this is that it's going to help keep the rice more separate when it's done. It's longer rice, so it should be able to be more separate. If you are concerned that it's not going to do it quite as much as you would like, you could always rinse the rice a little bit in addition. Now to that, since it's a 2-to-1 ratio, I had 1.5 cups of rice. I'm going to add 3 cups of some kind of liquid. And I saved the cooking liquid And this is going to give it a really beautiful color. As the rice swells up, it turns almost to a pink. And then I'm also going to add coconut water, which is what we would have used, what they would have used there, simply to try and recreate the experience. You could also use a chicken broth. You could use regular water. And then these are going to come up to a boil. Just follow the rice that comes, the package that comes with the rice that you have. Bring it up to a boil, let it simmer probably 15 or 20 minutes, depending on the variety of rice that you got. And then when it comes just to a boil, just starts to boil, we're going to add another item just for flavor. The garlic we added with the beans is going to cook till it's very, very soft. And I left it in. It adds a lot of flavor to the liquid that we've used here, but it also will blend in later. So if this was at a boil, we'd just lay that half of a green pepper in there, let it go ahead and come up to a simmer, put the lid on it, don't peek at it, and then in 15-20 minutes, you're going to take it off, let it cool, put it in the refrigerator, because this is day one. We're now ready for day two. Now, it could have been a couple of days earlier if you stored things. Maybe you put the beans in the freezer, that kind of thing, so that you'd have them ready to go. And I should mention that if you're not willing to cook the beans, you can also use canned beans, but you're not going to get as much of that beautiful cooking water to work with as you do if you cook them yourself. So keep that in mind. Don't let it make you that you don't want to try it. So now I've got another skillet for day two. And there's a couple of ways in different cultures that gallo pinto is consumed. And I'm going to give it to you the way that I received it. So that's the one I'm most familiar with. So again, 2 tablespoons of coconut oil in this case, but you could use whatever oil you happen to have on hand. And then 1/3 of a cup of onion to that. And again, we're going to let that simmer a little bit until it begins to become a little bit more translucent, or we would if we had a little bit more time. I'm going to move a little bit faster than that. We don't want it to brown, just translucent again, maybe 5 minutes if we had the time. Now to that, I'm going to add the rice that we cooked. When the rice was done, and you can see this one's been in the refrigerator a while, it's still holding the shape of the container, break it out and start spreading it around in the pan. And then what we're going to do is add the beans to this as well. I want to get the rice a little bit more separated first. You can see once it starts to break down, it does fall back into that more separate, more than the gluey rice that we would expect if we were eating with chopsticks. And then the beans. And you may be able to see chunks of garlic in there because I still kept it. And you also will remember that we didn't add any salt when we cooked the beans. We didn't add any salt when we cooked the rice, but salt is involved here. So I'm going to add a teaspoon of kosher salt. And you may want to start with less and work your way up. And just stir that around. And I'm going to add a little bit more coconut water to that as well. And you can see some of the coconut oil is still in the container, so that will melt down as well. We're just going to, at this point, heat it through. Now, in some families, what they will do is they will make sure that it's heated through, and then they'll let it sit in the pan because they want the bottom to get a little bit crispy. They prefer it with that crispiness, but I never had it served to me that way. So thus far, I've been sticking to, actually, I've just been trying to figure out this recipe before I moved on to the variations on a theme. So now we'll assume that this has now heated through. It will definitely take longer than this when you do it. And I also notice Nicaraguans are not shy about portion size. So they will take a large portion, and this will be a primary component of the meal for a lot of families. In fact, in some families in low-income areas, this may be the meal if they're fortunate enough to have this much. So remember, when you travel, try to bring a pizza at home. Whenever I see a dish like this, I'm always going to think of the times that I had down there and the friends that I made. I hope you'll give it a try. For Oklahoma Gardening, I'm Barbara Brown.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.